The market is looking at whether the ceasefire could hold or whether it could veer off course because of the Israeli relationship with Lebanon. Those talks are set to take place next week. But the background here, of course, the bombardment that we saw in the last 24 hours of Lebanon. What do you make of the road towards some sort of a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon?
Yeah, good to be with you. Here we are in a sort of tripartite ceasefire negotiation, one between Iran and the U.S. and one between Iran and Israel. And while Iran and the U.S. may be able to find ways in which they can come to terms, although in a very hard way, in a distrustful way, on the background, we know that the Israeli government is not keen to see any rapprochement between the United States and Iran. And in fact, the war in Lebanon is one of the main cards that the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, has in destabilizing any peace efforts between the United States and Iran. And the level of bombing that Beirut and throughout Lebanon is, in fact, to a certain extent, unprecedented, not even comparable to the 1982 bombing by Israel during the occupation of Beirut.
There's no doubt there's been a heavy deployment of weapons on Lebanon used. Let me get to the Israeli position and what it could mean in terms of how we digest this. The line from Netanyahu was that Israel would keep fighting to protect those in northern Israel from Hezbollah's rocket attacks. But you're keen to point out that Hezbollah is not simply an Iranian proxy. So how do we think about that ongoing threat between the two?
The relationship between Iran and Hezbollah is dated back to the 1980s, and indeed some of the key founders of Hezbollah had been in very close contact with the founders of the Islamic Republic in the late 1970s. And the Hezbollah has very organic relationship within the Shia population. This doesn't mean that the Shias of Lebanon all support Hezbollah, but it has been an enabler of social economic improvement for their lives. In the 80s, the Shias were the poorest of the poor in Lebanon, and now there's been a certain level of social mobility. So all of these plays in the sort of prospect of the place of Hezbollah in the future of Lebanon, while there are people who call for the dismissal of Hezbollah altogether as a political military party. On the other, many say that if Hezbollah gives up its arms, as Israel is asking, that would just be a sort of green light for further Israeli expansions, starting from the south, but then given also the rhetoric that is going on in Tel Aviv for a greater Israel project. And that's very concerning to a large number of Lebanese, not only the Shias.
Professor, one of the early aims, we believe, obviously it's very convoluted, but we believe of the Trump administration and possibly Israel as well, was some form of regime change. It looks like actually the IRGC has been emboldened and perhaps even looks stronger in a societal position in Iran now as well. Is that your understanding, that actually any hopes of regime change from domestic players and indeed from these external actions, that is just completely forlorn?
I think most of analysts that have been looking at Iran for over the past 4 decades were quite aware that in a situation of conflict, of war with the United States, the military cause and the security cause would be emboldened, partly because this is not a one-man regime, as in the case of Iraq in 2003, when you had Saddam and its closest circles that ran the country. Iran is a very complex country which has elected institutions as well as long-established security and intelligence apparatuses. So that means that the country has a level of complexity and crisis management preparation, as in any sort of developed countries, that can sort of react to situations such as a war. Plus, we've seen the popular protest in the end of 2025, early 2026, which delegitimized the Islamic Republic vis-a-vis the population, but with the war from two external forces that themselves don't enjoy much of a legitimacy worldwide. Think about the Epstein case, how it has delegitimized the US vis-a-vis the global South, for instance, and its connection allegedly to Israel. That kind of puts this war in a very, very awkward situation, even for those who may be sympathetic to regime change. So we are in a conjuncture that really doesn't help thinking of a change in the political system legitimized by foreign actors that themselves are quite illegitimate worldwide.